Right, let's make a start. It's 4 o'clock dead on as far as I can see. Afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. Welcome to the latest Plymouth City Council Planning Committee. First up is apologies. Do we have any apologies recorded or submitted?
No apologies, Chair.
Okay, it's only Patrick's missing at the moment, but he was on the site visit, so I'll assume he's on his way. We'll wait to see him. Declarations of interest. I presume we've all filled out our forms, but is there anything people want to declare at this point? No. If not, as per usual, if anything occurs to you later on that you haven't foreseen, just come in at the next available juncture, and we'll get it on the record. Minutes. Anything from our July meeting that anyone wants to raise on the minutes before we sign them off? This is your last chance. In which case, I will do just that. And Tina, if you could pass them over, I'd be very, very grateful. Thank you. There's nothing under item 4 that I as chair need to raise. I don't think we've got any questions from the public. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
Yep, thank you very much. So we'll move on apace then to item number 6, the planning applications themselves. And 6.1 is first. And Cody is the case officer for this one. At 6.1, this is an employee application, hence being at the committee, I think I'm right in saying.
Yes, Chair.
So rather than take the report, the presentation first, are there any questions or comments that committee members have? We'll just wait for Patrick to... No problem, we'll just wait for you to catch your breath there. So we've just moved on to 6.1, Patrick, the first planning application, and as it's an employee one, we're just checking to see if there's any issues. No, if not, we'll move to the recommendation, which, as you can see on page 5, is to grant conditionally. So if we can move to the vote, please, I'd be grateful. Great stuff, thanks. Okay, that's unanimous. I'll declare that one passed. Thank you very much. We'll then move on to page 11, which is item 6.2. 9 get away. And Cody, you're taking us through this one as well. Thank you. Again, an employee one.
Yes,
so
Chair.
Are there any points from the committee that anybody wants to raise or ask? No. If not, we will again move to the vote, and the recommendation, as you can see at the bottom of page 11, is to grant conditionally. So again, if we could move to the vote, please. Okay, that's agreed as well. Thank you very much. We'll now go on to 6.3, page 17, and we're now at land at Petersfield Close. And Amy, I think you're going to take us through this one, so whenever you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, committee members. This application here has been referred to Planning Committee by Councillor Tippett, and I just wanted to make you all aware there is an addendum report for this application that highlights some changes to the wording of the conditions following some negotiations with the applicant. The application site is at the eastern end of Petersfield Close, which is located within the Compton ward of the city. The site slopes down from south to north, with the land is bordered with housing to the north, south and west of the site, while the east of the land is woodland below the grounds of Efford Cemetery, which is allocated as a green space within the joint local plan, as shown just here. The site has a long planning history, which dates back from the 1950s, which is a key consideration in this case. The 1964 consent, which was granted permission for 34 semi-detached homes and an access road, 8 of which the dwellings have already been constructed and are currently part of what forms Petersfield Close today, therefore making it an extant planning permission. The extant planning permission has previously been acknowledged by the Planning Authority and the Planning Inspectorate at Appeals along Petersfield Close. A recent application in 2022 on Petersfield Close for a single dwelling, while it was refused and taken to planning inspector, the inspector did make reference to the extant planning permission, which I think is a key consideration in this case. And you'll note that the inspector made reference to the fact that this, the extant planning permission has a greater than theoretical possibility that the fallback position could be constructed in the event that this appeal was dismissed. What I've shown here is a plan showing the extant planning permission, and the red dotted line is the application site that's being considered. This application is a resubmission of a previous application from 2022, which was similar to what we're considering today for 4 dwellings. However, the previous application was refused due to insufficient information being submitted to demonstrate that the development would not have an adverse impact on protected species and inadequate information on biodiversity net gain. The submitted application is therefore sought to overcome this refusal reason with the submission of protected species surveys, an updated ecological impact assessment and biodiversity net gain information, and made some other changes to the scheme, which include changes to the proposed materials and boundary treatment, which I'll go in a little bit more detail later. The application proposes to construct 4 4-bedroom detached dwellings with vehicular access at the end of Petersfield Close. The proposal will include, the 4 dwellings will have green roofs, Devon hedge bank, tree planting, and the retention of some of the existing woodland. Here's a 3D image of the proposed dwellings. As mentioned, the site slopes from south to north, and you can see from the site section on the screen how the proposed dwellings would sit within the site. The houses on the north of the access road will be 4 stories in height, but when viewed from the access road will be 2-story, and the other single house on its own will be 3 stories in height. So this is the dwellings that form one of the 3 that's proposed at one side of the access road. The proposed dwellings will have external materials that are proposed to be like render and natural timber, but you will note that we have added recommended a condition for the external materials to be agreed prior to their installation. Here shows the proposed floor plans of this property. You will note that there's the proposed place for air source heat pump. We've got an integral garage with space for bin stores, cycle storage and EV charging. And they also have the additional space for 2 cars to park on site. This is the proposed single dwelling that's on the other side of the access road, which is similar materials proposed. And again, it has the same in terms of it's got space for an air source heat pump, EV charging for vehicles, cycle storage bin store, and the proposed bedrooms just shown there as well. The applicant has provided some photo montages, so I thought you can have an idea of how the site would look from the surrounding area. You'll note from this one you can kind of see where the eye is and pointing in the direction of the site. And this is where how the proposal will look. We're looking from, I suppose, Edgar Buckland area towards the application site. Again, you'll see the eye is kind of positioned on Edgar Buckland Road, looking up towards Petersfield Close. And that's how the proposal will look from that direction. And again, this area again from kind of Buckland Way looking towards the application site, and you can see it's quite screened from the existing tree boundary. And this one's a bit more of a far-reaching look of the site. And you'll note this is the existing and proposed. I suppose it's not great on the screen, but there is a difference where you can just see slightly that the proposed development will be just screened largely by the existing trees. As mentioned before, this was a resubmission of a previously refused application, and there is some changes that have been included since that. One of them being they've changed it from what was originally a white render to a beige render, so it sits better within the environment. What was originally the procedural boarding is changed to a natural timber boarding. The access road was supposed to be asphalt, whereas now the access road, driveways and pedestrian access will be a grass system. It's grasscrete. They proposed some landscaping changes, so we've got some tree planting, some shrub planting, hedge bank and some green bank proposed. Did originally have raised planters, which is now being changed to ground level planters with railing. So again, it kind of gives it more of a greener aesthetic. The timber fencing for some of the three units have been changed to a boundary hedge. And what was a generic grass bank is kind of a green living wall on that single dwelling. While the changes have been made to the designs of the dwellings, the urban design team have raised objections, which include to the height of the proposed dwellings, the layout of the scheme, and the proposed street frontage being dominated by car parking. Officers have carefully considered the concerns made by the urban design officers and the changes that have been made since the previously refused application, and consider that the application to be acceptable on balance. The proposed dwellings would be a contemporary and modern design that has considered the topography of the site and the surrounding environment by retaining landscape features such as trees and reinforcing the eastern boundary with new planting. The proposed dwellings would not be situated immediately adjacent to any neighbouring properties on Petersfield Close, and therefore it is considered it would not have a detrimental impact on the existing street scene. You'll also note that the local highway authority are unable to support the scheme due to the extremely steep road accessed from Eggbutton Road onto Petersfield Close, and the creation of an inadequate visibility displays and failure to provide a reasonable access for all road users. However, it is noted that a previous application in 2007 for a single dwelling had previously been refused on this site, and one of the refusal reasons were based on the highway's concerns. That application was appealed, and the inspector acknowledged the concerns of what the highway department was saying, but considered that it had little weight in the determination of the application, considering that the extant planning permission plot was the same as what was being proposed. So because there was no increase in plot numbers, they didn't consider it a reason to refuse it on highways grounds. As I've mentioned previously, this application has been refused previously on the insufficient information on protected species and biodiversity net gain. While with this application, the applicant has provided protected species surveys, updated ecological impact assessment and biodiversity net gain information. It is, however, noted that the natural infrastructure team have raised concerns about the submitted details, highlighting that the proposal will result in a loss of 80% of the habitat on site and the impact that this would have on species. It is, however, considered that the submitted details have demonstrated that the proposal will not cause a direct harm to these protected species, which has overcome the previous reason for refusal. When compared to the fallback position, the extant consent could be completed with the only legal requirement for them to consider protected species under, which is the Wildlife and Countryside Act. However, with this current application, it can secure avoidance and mitigation measures such as grassland management, hedge and tree protective fencing, retention of woodland strips, habitat piles, hedgerow planting and management, inbuilt bat and bird and invertebrate provision, and ecological ecologists' compliance monitoring visits, which have all been provided in detail in the ecological impact assessment, which is recommended to be conditioned as part of this consent. While the natural infrastructure team do not agree with the calculations of the biodiversity net gain on this site, after undertaking their own assessment, they considered that the extant planning permission and current scheme would have a similar impact on biodiversity. It is therefore not considered a reason to refuse this application on these grounds. The proposal is considered to be very finely balanced. However, a key consideration in this case is the extant planning permission, which has been afforded significant weight in this case. The proposed scheme would result in its current ecological mitigation and enhancement measures, which will also include renewable energy and low carbon technology such as PV panels and EV charging points and sustainable urban and drainage systems, all of which will not be delivered through the extant planning permission. It is therefore considered that when weighing up the planning balance, the proposed development would secure benefits that the extant planning permission would not be able to, and this tips the balance in favour of supporting this proposal. Therefore, the application is recommended for conditional approval. Thank you.
Amy, thank you very much indeed. We have 3 speakers on this one, and our first is Councillor Dylan Tippett. If you'd like to make your way down, Dylan. No stranger to the planning committee. As I'm sure you know, you have 5 minutes. Would you like to be told when only one is left? Yes, please, Chair. Okay, in your own time. You want to sit down? That's the normal.
Oh, I get to sit down this time. This is awesome.
Just this once, just this once.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevens, and good afternoon to members of the Planning Committee. I've been objecting to planning applications on the Petersfield Close site since before I was elected, and in fact this was the first piece of casework that crossed my desk after I was elected as a member of Plymouth City Council. There are many, many reasons why over 70 local residents living on the streets surrounding the Petersfield Close site and I are objecting to this application today, and I will attempt to summarise some of them in under 5 minutes, so you can hold me to that. So we can move forward with the discussion. The first of these, and something that's very important to myself and all the local residents I've spoken to, is the potential ecological harm that could be caused by this development. It should be held with the highest significance that the Natural Infrastructure team have once again recommended that this application should be refused. The calculations from the Natural Infrastructure team show that developments on this site could reduce biodiversity by over 60%, even in the best case scenario. This is a country mile from the expectations of increased biodiversity in new developments set out by our joint local plan, which I know that we all feel is a key planning objective that we should be considering. Furthermore, when the very similar previous iteration of this plan was refused, the planning officer summarised that, and I quote, "The extant planning permission does not outweigh the legal protection afforded to species either living on or using the site. These species are still there." We saw yesterday on the site visit, it was clear that there were lots of thriving habitats and species on the site and adjacent to the proposed development. Local residents have cited even more species, including bats and badgers, many of which they've got photographs of that have been submitted to the council, and something that I know that we all here hold in a high regard and something we would want to protect. Furthermore, the extant planning permission is something that comes up a lot in this application. And while I want to remind you, when this planning permission was granted, England were yet to have won a World Cup and Councillor Bill Stevens still hadn't been born. So it's definitely an application, it's definitely planning permission that had been around for a very long time. I appreciate that there is this planning permission. I appreciate that this planning permission is there. However, when we look at the objections from highways, we need to remember when this original road was put in when the original Petersfield Close road was put in, the law was different on the elevation of a road. It was in the 1970s that actually roads that steep were no longer allowed to be built, therefore after the extant planning permission was granted, and so something that wouldn't have been considered at the time the original permission was put in place. In the last 2.5 years, there have been 7 planning applications related to this site, something that local residents have had to put up with and object to time and time again. I think it should speak volumes to the impact that it will have on the local community that there has been 7 applications campaigned against now within this area. A couple of other points I would like to raise include that there is a TPO on the adjacent site coming into Petersfield Close, so that on the access path. Whilst it's appreciated in the application that there will be no trees in the TPO area affected, it's important to recognise that the species mentioned earlier will be impacted in this TPO because of the development of an access road. Furthermore, the amount of car parking spaces that are being proposed for just 4 houses doesn't seem to quite make sense to me. I believe it says in the application that it's 13 car parking spaces. Thank you, Hannah. And finally, as my final point will be, in the joint local plan, we know that our housing stock is above the 5-year target that we have at the moment. These 4 developments are not required to help us meet our targets within the joint local plan. So in summary, the natural infrastructure team have objected to this. Urban design have their concerns. Highways have objected. These are all serious considerations that we need to take forward as councillors today. And so I say, let's put biodiversity first. Let's put our planning objectives first. Let's put the joint local plan first and vote down this application at Planning Committee today. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tippett. Our second speaker is Mrs. Rowland. Is Mrs. Rowland here? There we are. You're welcome, Mrs. Rowland. Again, 5 minutes will be yours. Would you like to be told when 4 have gone? Okay, over to you.
I read this statement on behalf of the residents of Petersfield Close, Jean Crescent, Higher Mows and Eggbutland Road, together with individuals from the wider community who object to further development. Out of the 77 signatures on the submitted petition, 70 live in the aforementioned roads and will potentially be affected. We know of only 1 household living within these roads who has submitted a supporting comment. As a community, we have, for the past 3 to 4 years, objected to any development within this site. During our objections, we became aware of the complexity of the application due to the legacy fallback position of extant permission, which we believe was implemented following the original construction of the close around 60 years ago. The adjacent site adjoining the close has been openly accessed by the public and has been used for dog walking and a play area, and it was assumed it was either council-owned or common land. No fencing or signage was present to indicate otherwise. For many years, there appeared to be a permissible path leading to the council-owned field to the east, where a local family kept horses. The absence of land management has resulted in the creation of a biodiverse sensitive habitat which holds significant value to the community and creates a natural stepping stone in what is a heavily populated residential area. Part of the site had previously been cleared of trees and vegetation, having been conditionally granted in 2017. According to local residents, this area has now successfully rewilded. Evidence has been collated and submitted to the planning from the community in the form of photographs, videos, sound recordings of wildlife, including protected species such as bats. The community's objections align themselves to the outcomes resulting in refusal from both highways and the natural infrastructure teams. There has also been refusal from the urban design team. Councillors Carlisle and Tippett have been very supportive of our campaign to prevent the destruction of this biodiverse site in order to accommodate the footprint of 4 large properties which we believe carry little weight in reducing the city's housing shortage, particularly as they are not classed as affordable. The community felt that there were a number of alternative brown sites within the city far better suited to development, which did not compromise biodiversity and provide far safer access. Another concern is the non-existence of community engagement, which many have interpreted as a degree of contempt for the neighbourhood. Despite 50 personal objections and a 77 signature petition, no attempt has been made to promote participation with local residents, address concerns or provide reassurance. We appreciate the planning department have been patient and have worked professionally within the parameters required for processing this application, and we would like to thank them for keeping the community informed. However, this application's prolonged process has resulted in avoidable delays due to the failure to meet the natural infrastructure key data requirements. So would it be possible to explain why the authority's report states that up to 80% loss of habitat should occur if this application succeeds? In addition, it appears that the applicant's survey failed to report habitat areas and net gain units accurately. This has not only caused frustration and anxiety with members of the community, but has, we believed, wasted the local authorities' time and resources. With a need to tackle climate change, the local community feels that by challenging this application, they are taking a small but significant and practical step towards Plymouth's contribution to the climate emergency. Over the years, our natural spaces have been infilled with development, minimalising local green space. There, of course, been a much publicised outcry following the city centre tree loss, and we feel that little attention has been given to the disappearing green spaces within our local areas. In summary, we believe that the biodiversity of this site will be significantly compromised if the decision is made to recommend this application. The road access is completely unsustainable and could pose a risk to the safety of pedestrians crossing the junction and an increase in road traffic accidents. Should this committee recommend this application, a precedent will be set to develop adjoining sites, resulting in further biodiversity loss. Thank you for listening to the community viewpoint. We hope that the decision you make will be for the good of both the community and the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Rowland. And our third speaker is Mr. Ross. Is Mr. Ross with us? Ah, there we are. You're welcome, Mr. Ross. Come and join us. There we are. You two will have 5 minutes. Would you like to be told when only one is left? Okay. Whenever you're set.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Council members. My name is Murray Ross, and I'm a Chartered Town Planner and the Director of Avalon Planning. I'm representing the applicant. The brownfield site at Petersfield Close is located within an established residential area and within walking distance of public transport in the Higher Compton local centre. The site benefits from planning permission for 6 dwellings, and this has been confirmed by Plymouth City Council and is acknowledged within the planning officer's report. It forms part of land that benefits from an extant planning permission for 34 houses. The applicant has the legal right to construct the 6 extant houses without any further planning permission. The principle of residential development has therefore been established. However, rather than construct 6 houses that were designed in the 1960s, the applicant seeks planning permission for 4 higher quality and more sustainable dwellings. Planning permission was granted for a scheme of 4 houses in 2018. However, due to the COVID pandemic, the applicant was unable to commence works before permission lapsed. The latest scheme is not only a significant improvement on the extant planning permission, but it also represents an improved proposal compared to the 2018 approval. And I wish to indicate that over 50% of the representations made on this current application are in support of the proposals. In regards to design, it is proposed to retain woodland strips along the northern and southern boundary of the site, and the proposed new houses have a bespoke design that responds to this woodland setting and the steeply sloping topography of the site. This ensures that the properties will not be overly dominant in the wider landscape context. With regards to the access to the site, we note the position of the Highways Authority. However, we wish to remind members that this matter has previously been addressed by an appeal inspector prior to number 28, Petersfield Close, being granted planning permission in 2008. The applicant is able to construct the extant 6 houses without any further planning permission, and the application before you proposes a reduction to 4 houses, which will result in less overall vehicle traffic. It is for this reason that the planning officer has considered the proposal acceptable in highways terms. With respect to ecology, the site has been surveyed by qualified ecologists, Ecologic. The results show that no bat roosts are present on site. With respect to bat activity, the site is not considered an important commuting habitat for bats. And with respect to feeding habitat, the site is used predominantly by bats tolerant of urban habitats. The survey results indicate that there are no badger sets in active use within the site. An outlier set was identified outside the red line boundary within the woodland area on the neighbouring site. As this area is to be retained, in addition to the woodland strips along the northern and southern boundaries of the site, a commuting corridor for badgers will be maintained between the outlier set and further habitats suitable for badgers to the east of the site. Mitigation and compensation measures, in addition to a significant number of enhancement measures, are proposed to prevent adverse impacts to these protected species. The case officer, in consultation with the Council's Natural Infrastructure team, has assessed the submitted ecology report in detail and has concluded that the proposed development is acceptable in ecology terms. The applicant provided biodiversity habitat scores for both the extant scheme and the proposed scheme. The results show that the latest proposed scheme provides a 45% increase in biodiversity compared to the extant permission. Natural Infrastructure team consider that the woodland areas should be included within the biodiversity score for the extant planning permission. However, there are no planning conditions that secure the retention of the woodland on the extant planning permission. Natural Infrastructure team claim that a large area of scrub within the retained woodland area should be counted as amenity grassland when calculating the biodiversity score for the proposed development. However, these areas are clearly marked as being retained on the proposed plans. Nowhere on the proposed drawings is it stated that the scrub will be removed and replaced with amenity grassland, which has a much lower biodiversity score. Even if the Natural Infrastructure team's claims were to be accepted, the difference between the extant planning permission and the proposed development is negligible. When the mitigation, compensation and enhancement measures are considered, which can be secured by planning condition, the proposed development is clearly a significant improvement on the extant planning permission. Furthermore, the proposed development includes a sustainable drainage system and renewable energy technology, all of which, neither of which are included within the extant planning permission. Overall, therefore, the proposed development represents a significant betterment over the fallback position. I welcome members' consideration of this proposal. This is a valuable opportunity to provide an improved scheme to the original 1960s design, enabling 4 high-quality dwellings to come forward within this sustainable location. Thank you.
Mr. Ross, thank you very much indeed. And it's now open to the committee for questions and comments totally unrelated to my age. And Zoe was first.
Hi. During that speak, we have an officer who's all about trees, don't we, if I remember rightly. You were shaking your head quite a lot through that. And I just wondered what your thoughts were with respect to the biodiversity and the trees.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I think Amy's report makes clear that our team has a completely different view of the ecological information to that submitted by Ecologic, the applicant's consultants. And I suppose the bottom line is there's a lot of, we could spend a very long time going into detail.
And no, we couldn't. I have to tell you, we couldn't.
Well, and to save that time, I think the bottom line, and there's no disagreement over this between ourselves and Ecologic, 80% of the habitat on site is lost. And consequently, 80% of the habitat that's currently available for protected species is lost. So without going into sort of all the fine detail, that's the position that myself and my team take. We've disagreed over the quality of the surveys, over the assessment of impacts, proposals for mitigation or compensation, but the bottom line is 80% of the habitat will be lost as a result of the development.
Thank you. I think I don't have any more questions, but I do think that when you have so many residents, you really do need to have a think about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. James was next.
Thank you, Bill. My question is in terms of amenity. Can you put slides 26 and 27 back up, which was the those two there? Can you point out to us where the differences are? Because I've looked on my laptop and I cannot find the difference.
I can get my mouse on there to even show you, but let me see if I can do it this way. But the only thing is that it then makes the image a lot smaller. But effectively, it'll be in this location here. So you can just see, from this it shows like a minor difference.
Can you put the proposal back up bigger just so we can have a close, now I know where to look.
On the proposed side?
Yeah, now you've pointed out just so we can have a closer look.
So if I flick between the two.
Okay, thank you. So that's the first part of my question. Now I know where to. The second part is on one of the other slides. It had the application. You could see it through the hedgerow. Now I don't know if it was put on slide 21. I think it was. If that's any help at all. That one there. So I'm assuming that you won't be able to see the proposed development through the trees. Am I right?
So the photo montages, as you can see, it's largely screened by the tree. The only thing, again, you can't see my mouse, but you can see the dwellings, some of the dwellings, just if you see like the three houses at the bottom.
Yeah.
If you look up in the one that's largely in the middle of the screen, the purely white one, if you look up, that's where the houses are, and that's what you'll be seeing.
So that's, okay. So in terms of amenity, they do appear to be quite out of place. They don't seem to fit with the surrounding property. So I'm wondering if that consideration's been taken account of, because they do seem to be quite unique in the way they look in the setting.
Yeah, I suppose that is being a consideration. The impact, the visual impact, has been considered and designed. And like I mentioned in my officer report, the urban design have also raised concerns about it. However, in my opinion, I didn't consider it a reason to refuse. They are a modern construction. They aren't in keeping with the existing houses that are there, which is obviously a 1960 type build. But in my opinion, I didn't consider it a reason to refuse the application.
Thanks, James. Ian Poyser was next.
Thank you, Chair. So we know that there's been a lot of conversation around today around the extent planning condition, which is currently on this site at the 1960s. In that respect, then, there's been no formal designation on that site for a green space through the joint local plan. That's not possible. Mr. Ross mentioned that the site is designated as a brownfield site. I just wondered what's the council's position on that statement?
So in terms of it's not been allocated as such as in like the joint local plan, like I was showing you earlier, where they had the green space. Brownfield site is a previously developed site. And then you've got green spaces, which obviously hasn't been developed. I wouldn't say it's a greenfield site in the sense that some of the site has already had some of the service put in. So I understand that the drainage systems have been put in for the whole estate, which would have been the 34 dwellings. But I wouldn't say there's a formal designation as a green or a brownfield site.
Thank you, Amy. The surrounding areas where there hasn't been the structures, been subsurface structures put in, the drainage, etc., could be designated as greenfield because they haven't been developed. They remain undeveloped.
It wouldn't be able to be designated because of the extant planning permission. So if I just show you the greenfield designation, I suppose. So this is the site, and you can kind of see the area in which the extant planning permission sits. And because it's got that extant planning permission, we are unable to get it designated. So yeah, we wouldn't be able to.
Okay, thanks. Patrick and Kathy will follow.
Thank you, Chair. And just picking up on Amy's sort of officer report, when effectively the recommendation is finally balanced, because all these things are a matter of judgment. Having said that, and obviously, Amy as the planning officer is taking into account the history of the site. and trying to obviously come to a conclusion. And that's why it's good that there's some democratic accountability in terms of this process. And I welcome Councillor Tippett's referral to the Planning Committee to ensure that there's adequate public scrutiny on the proposal. Because I'm afraid I don't support the officer recommendation, and I'll tell you why. That notwithstanding the history of the site, and it's disappointing that the then ward councillors, Alderman Ball and former councillor Fletcher, as long-standing ward councillors for Compton, hadn't referred this back at the time that councillors were dealing with the joint local plan. And having been the cabinet member for part of that process, along with Councillor Coker, these sorts of issues could have been teased out of the joint local plan public inquiry with a government inspector, where there is merit for these sites actually to be de-designated and actually to be enshrined with a new policy. And it's, you know, they're not many, but there are examples of other sites where the use hitherto in the planning policy had changed through the joint local plan public inquiry. Now, it might be that that's the only way to do it, but nevertheless, that debate should have been taking place in 2017, 2018, before the government inspector. Now, there is an approval on the site. We have to just accept it. But what we shouldn't be accepting as councillors is that the policy framework these days does take into account more than just building houses. It does take into account our natural environment. It does actually recognise climate change. And therefore, I don't think it's as finely balanced as it's being recommended to us today. And notwithstanding that, Dev 10 and 20, in terms of design and context that the development is proposed, I don't think is in keeping with the site. So notwithstanding the impact that Mr. Daniel from the Natural Infrastructure team has said to us today, there are other matters, through you, Chair, to the case officer, that I think outweigh the recommendation for approval. So I won't be supporting this application. I won't be supporting it on the basis of Dev 10 and Dev 20, which is around the design and impact on the site. But more substantially, that debate about Dev 26 and the natural environment, for me, and really in the eyes of the public, councillors should be taking the lead on. And if it does mean that the council is taken to a public inquiry, then we should be prepared to stand up and fight for our local communities. A government inspector is an isolated individual. So notwithstanding that government inspectors have made previous decisions, those decisions can evolve through that process. And I think we should be bold enough to refuse this application and refuse it based on policy grounds, notwithstanding there's a lot of public support for its refusal, but there are valid public policy reasons for us to take this, to refuse it and to lead the debate on its future preservation. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Patrick. Kathy was next, please.
My question was, because of the weight that's been put on this extant planning consent, we haven't had a copy of it, and it would be very good to actually see so we could compare that with what is now before us.
I suppose the only plan, obviously, that I've got that I can show you is the layout plan, which I showed earlier, which had the layout that just there, so you can see that it's the semi-detached dwellings along the Petersfield Close, but that's all I can show you, unfortunately.
You've got no further information, no conditions or anything attached to it?
Was going back to that permission all those years ago, was that a full permission, or was it what we would now call an outline permission? Or was it outline and reserved?
I suppose at that time we didn't have like the suffixes of like what we do now, but in terms of my...
Hang on, Amy, I'm really sorry. Could we, guys, some voices do carry, I'm afraid. So if we could, if we are going to do that, if we could be discreet, I'd be grateful. Amy, please.
So, like I was saying, we didn't have like the suffixes that we did today in terms of the different types of applications, but what my opinion is, obviously, is that that consent commenced. So it would have been treated as similar to like a full application in the sense that permission was granted and they started building out, and obviously 8 of them are now constructed.
Kathy, I did interrupt, so I'll come back to you, and then I just want to tease out some more about the 1960s one. So Kathy, back to you, please.
We don't actually know what sort of houses then should have been constructed there, apart from the fact there were 6 semis. Is that correct?
So it will be the ones, as the ones we saw yesterday on site. It will be a continuation of that.
Okay, thank you.
So, no, I'll come back. Other people have been waiting patiently. Sarah was the first of those.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it's a question about there are things in the joint local plan. Apologies, I don't have such a working knowledge as Councillor Nicholson when it comes to all the different clauses in the joint local plan, but there is definitely, if I recall correctly, something about town cramming. And I just wondered, is there an actual definition of that? Because my fear is that this development is a case of town cramming.
Dev 10 is the policy that makes reference to town cramming. Off the top of my head, I don't know if it includes a definition of it. I believe town cramming, though, again, correct me if I'm wrong, refers to garden development and garden. But in my opinion, as case officer, I didn't consider it to be town cramming purely because, again, the extant planning permission does set a precedent for the principle of residential development in that location. And obviously it was 6 plots that now will be 4 plots.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
So if we accept that the 1964 permission is still live, as it were, to me, that means we couldn't refuse, and we accept if we're going to be bound at all by that, that means that we can't refuse anything within this red line on the principle of housing. But how does that widen out? Because I'm struggling to see that. Yes, to say that you can't have housing at all on this site, I understand that's tying our hands from the 1960s, but there are other considerations as well. So I'm struggling to see how the one leads to the other.
So I suppose, like you've kind of said and indicated, a principle's been set. So in my opinion, you couldn't refuse this on the principle of it being residential development. However, this scheme is very different to the extant planning permission, and I suppose that's where the scope kind of falls into the considerations that you can take into account. I don't know if that helps.
So we have to judge it on today's situation in terms of the detail. We can't say no housing, but in terms of the detail, we can look at it through 2023 eyes, if that's a fair way of putting it.
Yeah, effectively, but I think, like I've kind of explained, it is a balance. So it is constantly balancing that up. So the current kind of policies, but what would be allowed effectively as a fallback position.
And when I have got everyone else, please don't worry. When the inspector has given, or the inspectorate has given opinion on this with relation to the 1964 permission, do you have the wording on that in terms of, look at that, yeah.
So this is the most recent one. Like I said, this one was one in 2022. And one thing that they're saying here is they accept that there is a greater than theoretical possibility that the fallback position could be constructed in the event the appeal was dismissed. So in my opinion, and my interpretation of that is the inspector is saying that if that appeal was dismissed, they could still construct the extant planning permission. So and that weighs obviously in, but also there has been other appeal decisions. So there was one on an application that was in 2007, which was the highways one that I referenced earlier, and again the planning inspector made reference to the extant planning permission.
Yeah, it just strikes me that if there were a greater than theoretical possibility, then they've had 59 years to take the chance to do it, and we're still waiting as of today. That's my take at the moment. Rebecca was next on the list.
Thank you, Bill. I wanted to just ask a quick question on the 80% before I then just make another point. So you referred back to the loss of the 80% of biodiversity. Can you just reiterate which bit of the development you're talking about? Is that the 80% of the chunk that is having the 4 houses built on it, or 80% of everything that's not yet been developed? I'm not arguing it, I just want to be clear in my mind.
That was a good question. The 80% is stated in the ecologic report that the habitat within the red line boundary for the application, it's 80% of that habitat present on site within the red line boundary.
Thank you. Just let me tease this out a little bit as well. Amy, in terms, or through you, Chair, the views that we've seen of the mock-up of what it will look like has a huge amount of trees in the pictures. If we're losing 80% of that habitat, how much of those shots are actually going to look like the mock-up? Because it strikes me that there's more than 80% of greenery showing there, so that doesn't quite match up, because that's going to then relate to my final point. So could you just, I mean, you might want to put some of the pictures up, but because to my mind, I slightly disagree with Councillor Nicholson that I think it doesn't look bad because you can hardly see it. But if 80% of the green space is going, then he's got a point, and I just wanted to reiterate what that would be meaning.
So in terms of the trees, though, I think they're proposing to lose 1 of the trees, and as part of that, they are looking to replace it with 6. So in terms of like what you're saying in terms of the visual impact in the trees, they do provide some screening, but I suppose when in terms of the 8% habitat value is like grassland and things like that. So there is obviously with the development, the existing green space in the middle of the site will obviously be developed, and I suppose I will note that the applicant has tried to make it greener compared to the previous refusal. They're looking to do the grasscrete instead of the asphalt. They've changed the colour of the render, so yeah, but I suppose that's all I just wanted to add to that.
Okay, I've just got a comment to make in that case. So I suppose I'm just recognising the work that has gone in to create a design that has all these features that are matching what we require in terms of solar panels, electric vehicle, green roofs, the changes to the render colour, to the wood. I think I just want to, regardless of how I vote today or the outcome of today, I actually like the design, and I know we're comparing it to the 1960s design alongside it, but I think pretty much every other design across the city, we're not expecting them to look like 1960s houses. We want something a bit fresher. So I just want to say, from a design perspective, I appreciate that the experts don't like it, but I personally quite welcome the fact that sat within the trees, and given how green they are, they blend better than I've seen in other cases. So I just didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater from the design perspective, because I actually can appreciate what they've tried to do there. So I suppose what I'm saying, Chair, is if a refusal is on design, I don't entirely agree with that, but that means I might get overridden on that, but I just wanted that to be on the record, that not everybody on the committee disagrees with the design. Thank you.
Well, we haven't worked out how anyone feels at the moment. Let's just be clear about that. Just in terms of the 1964 one, if that were to be implemented, as the inspector thinks is a possibility for some reason, have we got anything other than, and this isn't meant in any bad way to you, Amy, anything more than that grainy old plan to determine whether or not what they build is in accordance with the permission that they have? Because if this were to be built, if this were to get permission, we would have a lot of detail about whether what eventually goes there is in accordance with the permission or not. If the 1964 one were to be built, which legally it can be, how would we know if it's in accordance with their permission?
The only plan that I've seen in relation to the 64 consent is what I've been provided with this application. So I can't comment on what it would look like. Like I've said, I've made the assumption of it would need to look like the existing properties, but I can't tell you that I've seen a plan for the 1964 consent.
That's helpful, thank you. Angela.
Thank you very much, Chair. In fact, in your last remarks, you've covered some of the issues that have been worrying me, and in fact, Councillor Nicholson as well, because I studied this very carefully, and I'm very, very grateful to the speakers and to the officer for explaining a lot of things. But the thing I kept coming back to was the question really, has this consent been reviewed? Has the 1964 position, fallback position, been reviewed in the light of all the factors that have changed in 60 years? And I think some of those, particularly the ecological ones, have been covered. But the one that really worries me, it's been mentioned, but I mean, is knowing the area, is the dangerous road, the Egg-Buckland Road, and that gradient going up. I know we're only talking about 4 houses, but I still think that it's very surprising, and I'm asking why not more weight was given to the Highways Authority recommendation. So again, I think I would support the idea that some of these, if they still stand, we do have to look at them much more carefully in view of what so many factors, the changes in factors that have taken place in the last 60 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. If the 1964 permission didn't exist and everything else about the location and the proposal was the same, would your recommendation be the same?
I suppose it's a tricky one for me to answer, given I've got to determine it on what's in front of me and at the time. There'd definitely be concerns. Obviously, I think I've given quite a lot of weight in my decision to the extant planning permission, which tipped it in favour, and it quite possibly be the fact that my recommendation could be refusal if the extant planning permission wasn't.
The phrase tipped it in favour rather suggests that without it, it would be on the other side. Is that fair?
It's fair to say that, yeah, there could be a potential that if it was a case that there wasn't an extant planning permission, obviously there is policies like Dev 26 that's been quoted today, where we want to have a biodiversity net gain, so they'd need to demonstrate a biodiversity net gain. And again, the highways concerns, again, but it's tricky to look at it in that instance when there is such a planning history and inspectors have commented on it with favour, I suppose, mentioning how the extant planning permission.
Thanks. Paul wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. A few points. The first one, we see this lovely photo rendering thing. We went and looked across the valley yesterday. Couldn't see much. It's the middle of summer. The trees are all green. Do you have any pictures of what it would look like in winter at all?
No, unfortunately, I've only got these that I've shown you today.
Yeah, because obviously that's a slightly unbalanced picture. And the white rendering that's now going to become beige, is there anything to stop people painting that beige rendering a different colour in future?
So as my recommendation, I've got a condition for the external materials to be agreed. So they would need to be submitted to us and agreed. And I think that as part of that condition, it says that it needs to be then kept in accordance with the details that we further agree. So, yeah, we would be agreeing it, and whatever would be agreed would need to be retained.
And finally, as I represent the residents of Deer Park, just up the Egg-Buckland Road, I would agree with Councillor Penrose. The junction's terrible, very dangerous, and 4 houses, they say not as much traffic as 6, but they're massive houses with loads of car parking, as Councillor Tippett suggested, so I think that could be dangerous going forward as well. Thank you, Chair.
Although some of us, and I'm sure everyone will join in the spirit, congratulate you on your election victory. Just for the record, you're here for the good of the city at this committee, not for an individual ward, which I'm sure you know, and you were about to come in and say that before I interrupted you, I'm sure. Excellent. Ian Tuffin.
I might be repeating what's already been said, but I think it's important. The road, I actually had some personal experience of that road because someone I knew lived up there, and in the winter it's virtually impassable if there's a frost or an icy road. We hear there's going to be 13 car parking spaces in the developments, presumably with visitors. I mean, we're probably looking at 20 extra cars in that area. It seems to me that as we did the site visit, it's already at a maximum. And to my mind, we would be failing in our duty if we just ignored the danger to the public, because it is such a dangerous junction. So I feel this is an area where we need much more information, because at this point I feel that I cannot support this solely on the grounds of safety. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ian. That was the last name on my list. If anyone wants to come in, I mean, time isn't a great factor at the moment. He says before 20 hands will go up, but I am going to try and be flexible, and then we'll try and reach some form of conclusion. Patrick was the first I saw.
Thank you, Chair. It was only just to sort of follow on and try and move debate on. I'm happy to move a recommendation other than the one that the officer's putting to us, that we actually refuse on the basis of Dev 10, 20 and 26. So I'll pick up on Councillor Smith's point about...
I think it would help if you could, as well as give the reference, spell out the actual planning reasons.
Yeah, no, happy to
refusal.
do so. So
Yeah.
if I pick up just and respond to the debate that Councillor Smith raised about design, the issue for me, and I think the issue for this committee, should be the way that design sits in the landscape, and recognising the applicant has tried to look at the levels and therefore have split level accommodation. The sheer size of the dwellings sat in the context of a woodland, for me, isn't the right design. And you know, anecdotally, when you see see programs on television of construction in a natural environment, it can look substantially different to what's being proposed. So from a design perspective, on this site, for me, it's not the right design. And then when you take, so Dev 10 looks at the individual sort of aspects of the design and development, but Dev 20 is looking at urban planning and sort of spatial design from a more city context. And you know, for me, again, the officers themselves are saying this is a bad development. Now, you know, we're here representing the public, and if our officers are saying from a urban design perspective that they're not happy with it, we should recognise that. You know, we're having a debate on Amy as a town and country planner, her recommendation. We haven't got the urban design here that I can see, where we could have an equally academic debate about this proposal with them present. So we should recognise that they are saying they oppose this development. We have the fortunate presence of Mr. Daniel, who's effectively representing the council's natural infrastructure team around Dev 26 and the impact on the site, and recognising that actually climate change and the natural infrastructural impact of development should be taken into account. And you can't have it more explicit from the officer present that's saying 80% of the site's destroyed by the current proposal. So I'm trying to move the committee on, looking not at the history, but looking at this development and how this development, in the event that this site would have to be developed, should be developed. And this current proposal for me is the wrong form of development for this site. And I would urge members of the committee to support refusal based on those three policy areas. So I'm happy to move that to stimulate debate and try and bring it to a conclusion, Chair.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, James, yeah.
Just say I'll be happy to second that as a recommendation.
The other, so Patrick, you're basically looking at the points made by the natural infrastructure team and the urban design team. We also heard, and I think Ian Tuffin raised it quite well just a few moments ago, in terms of the issues from the highways team, in terms of the access and the steepness of the road. Do people think that would be a suitable reason to add on? I'm just thinking it was something that was glaringly obvious on the site visit, and to the extent the highways team have mentioned it.
Chair, having only once driven up the road, and that was yesterday, I don't think I'll ever drive up that junction again. But we got Mr. Oakes present from the highway perspective. You know, I've got grave concerns and support Ian. I'm surprised Ian, Councillor Tuffin, parked on the steepest part of the junction yesterday, which is incredible. But
I think there was some idiot in front of Ian not letting him in because he was scared to park somewhere.
But could the highway officer offer a bit more advice on that?
Yeah, thank you. So we've been consistent on our responses for these applications in Petersfield Close. We are mindful of the precedent and the extant consent, obviously, as it's been discussed many times today. Development needs to be accessible for all users to promote active and sustainable travel. Cars can make this. I've been up there a couple of times in mine and driven out very slowly myself. So we do recommend refusal. However, as Amy alluded to earlier, our recommendation for refusal was overturned by an inspector. So although we have recommended refusal within our consultation, we've also recommended some conditions if you were to recommend in favour.
We haven't come to a conclusion yet, but I do sense the way it's moving here. If we were to refuse, I don't think we can ignore, or at least ignore the 1964 permission, or sort of somehow pretend it doesn't exist and magic it away. But I don't like being a prisoner of history here. Under normal circumstances, when we didn't have this historical issue sort of hanging around, I think we've heard enough. And in fairness to Amy, I was trying to tease out of her, and apologies if I went a little bit too far, that the actual reasons on the ground today would be enough to simply refuse it, and I think that's been reflected in the debate. So if we were to refuse, I think we'd need to be very robust in how we deal with the 1964 issue, and I think, Patrick, in your first contribution, you raised this about how we approach it. I really disagree with the inspector that there is a more than theoretical possibility. They've had since 1964, and I know Councillor Tippett's, in his normal humorous way, reminded us just how long ago that was, but that's an awful long time. You think what's happened in Plymouth since 1964, and these few houses still haven't been built. It ain't going to happen. The 1964 one is not going to happen. We can debate current applications, and obviously, and as Amy's reminded us, we've had a few over recent years. But I really, really am frustrated by the idea of having our concerns about the steepness of the road, about the biodiversity, about the urban design comments, almost, despite all that, having our hands tied by something that really isn't even a theoretical possibility in my view. So I'm minded, as you can probably tell, to oppose, and I certainly would agree with the highways and the natural infrastructure comments. I would say with the design, and I know you raised this, Patrick, I think there's always a danger with that, in as much as even just Rebecca's comments, and Rebecca doesn't, forgive me, doesn't seem to be a cheerleader for this application in any way. But when you get into those subjective elements of design, it's always a bit, we don't know the opinion of the inspector might have an opinion that is closer to Rebecca's or an opinion that's closer to yours. I personally wouldn't want to take that chance. I think the more objective facts of the biodiversity, and no one can argue with the steepness of the hill. That's not a matter of opinion in the same way design is. So could I ask, Patrick, that we perhaps park that one and concentrate on the other two?
What I suggest is we go through a series of votes on the reasons why we might want to refuse. The reason I say, and I'll stick to my point on this, is that the scale and massing of the design has an impact on the landscape. So it's a material consideration for me. I'm happy to put that to the vote.
Okay,
if the committee vote it down, vote it down.
Yeah.
But
and that's totally your privilege, and I think everybody, even if they disagree, everybody understands that. It's all a bit academic at the moment. So what I want to do in terms of progressing is to actually vote on the planning application itself, and the recommendation is to grant conditionally, as it says on page 17. That's the officer recommendation. We have a move to refuse, which has been seconded. What I will do, with your permission, just for ease of our voting, and so everybody watching can follow it, with your permission, Patrick, what I will do is just put Amy's recommendation to the vote. So if we vote yes, we are granting planning permission, and if we vote no, we are refusing planning permission. If we vote yes, then officers will go ahead with the decision notice. If we vote no, then we'll come back to the reasons. Does everybody follow that? Okay, so the recommendation is to grant conditionally, and based on how I've described it, could we move to the vote on that one, please? Okay, thank you very much. So we've refused that one, but as I said, we do now and then need to tease out, which is our duty, the refusal reasons. And the three, I think, that we've got so far are the highways issues in terms of the steepness of the entrance to Petersfield Close off, is it Buckland Road? Is that the main one? Thank you, Amy. We've got the biodiversity issues highlighted by our natural infrastructure colleagues, and the design problems that the urban design team have put forward. Those are what's before us. What I'll do is put those as our submission in terms of refusal reasons at the moment. Does anybody want to add to or subtract from those, Patrick?
So when you say about design, urban design, are you confining the objection to Dev 20? And where's Dev 10 fit into your? Because basically, urban design is both policies, both have an impact on one another, and that's where I'd want us to reference both 20 and 10.
Okay, Stuart wants to come in.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, so I've been listening to obviously to the concerns in relation to design, and I suppose there's two aspects to the design that have probably been discussed. There's the layout, the height, and the impact on the landscape. And then there's the comments that were made in relation to the architecture, probably more so in terms of that being favourable. So I think if we are going to go down the design route, we need to be clear about which aspect that is. And I think Councillor Nicholson is referring to, I've tried to put some words together, potentially an adverse impact on the local landscape character by virtue of height and layout, contrary to Dev 10 and Dev 20. Is that, does that reflect?
To you, Stuart, it does.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing many shaking heads around the committee, so are we happy then that those form our refusal reasons? Okay, if that could be minuted, that's helpful, and obviously officers will work out the detail, which we'll be grateful for in due course. Yeah, is there a way, before we come into it, just in terms of the issue of the extant permission, how we're going to address that if needed? Because obviously we've got our refusal reasons based on the application in front of us. No doubt. Now I can see two people on phones. Was that? Oh, we will note that for next time. Is there a way of just recording our view of how we approach that if needed? Or should we wait, sort of cross that bridge when we come to it? What would your advice be, Stuart?
I think three reasons for the refusal that you've got. So just so that we've got absolute clarity in terms of working up the wording, we've got some words I think that we've agreed for the design. On highways, is the specific concern around highway safety of the junction? Is that what we're happy with? And we can reference the relevant policy, I don't know offhand. And then in terms of biodiversity and Dev 26, is it the impact on protected species, or is it the failure of the scheme to adequately protect biodiversity and protected species, contrary to Dev 26? Is that sufficient?
That seems to be
we'll come to the proper wording, but that's the general gist of it. And then on the extant consent, I mean that's not one of your reasons for refusal, but I mean it's obviously in your gift to minute your concerns about that, but we probably wouldn't want to capture that in a reason.
No, it's not a refusal. It's not a reason for refusing planning permission, but I don't want to give the, and I know we spent a considerable time mentioning it, but I don't want to give the impression that we're ignoring it or pretending it doesn't exist or anything like that. So, Patrick, did you have a view on that?
I think, yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Stuart's made the right point. We could minute sort of the précis of a minute, because generally you minute it by obviously having a schedule of the voting and just saying approved, not approved, and what the condition might. But we can certainly have some formal words in the minutes that recognise that the committee acknowledged the history of the site, 1964 permission, but notwithstanding that, refused on the basis of X, Y, and Z.
Any dissent? No? All right, that's helpful. We'll do that. And I think that covers us for this item. Is that right? Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, everybody. I think that was well worth the time spent on that one, so we're grateful. Item 7, page 47, is the list of applications. Is there anything there anyone wants to raise? No. Item 8 are the appeal decisions, which I don't think we have any this time, and then we have no exempt business. So thank you very much, everybody, and for everybody watching at home, and see you all next